morning, world. I'm Steve Rao, the host of Pod and Roku TV's World Edition. And on this show, we talk about global affairs, innovation, turbulence in an increasingly divisive world politically, and also tough times economically. I greet you live from the All-America city of Morrisville in North Carolina, the eighth largest state in the Union. Today, we have a special guest, but before we begin, I want to open up with just some things that we're going to talk about today. First of all, there's videos that show a lot of similarities to the January 6th attack in Brazil and the January 6th riots 2 years ago. Supporters of former President Jair Bolsonaro stormed the main buildings of all three branches of government. The tactics used breaking law enforcement as well as destruction inside the buildings, and Brazilian officials knew in advance of the protest but thought they could contain it. Classified documents were found in President Biden's former office, about 10 files in his office after he was vice president. They were quickly given to the National Archives, and they are going to be reviewing the documents. We pray for California as 14 have died from the terrible storms. Heavy rains will continue today. Up to 7 more inches could fall this week. And finally, Russia launched a powerful attack in the eastern region of Ukraine. Russian troops are trying to seize a salt mining town in the Donetsk region. And congratulations to, the final thing is we're all open to listening to the tell-all interview with Anderson Cooper tomorrow on CNN on Prince Harry. His book, Memoir Spare, hits bookstores today. And congratulations to the Georgia Bulldogs. Although I'm an Alabama fan because I was married in Alabama and my in-laws raised their family there for about 12 years on the U.S. Air Force Base there in Montgomery, Alabama, the Georgia Bulldogs won their second national championship. I wonder if Herschel Walker was running since he didn't have time to be a U.S. Senator. Let's get started. Here we go. Today we have Mark Lee.
Yes, definitely. I was watching that game as well, and like you said, we do have a guest. I was going to bring up
that was a quick. That was a beautiful political hit jab when you were moderating.
Jab, but we're going to get to a couple other jabs as well, and we do have our special guest. But I was going to bring up
nothing good about that, Steve. There was nothing at all good about having a crack at Herschel Walker just like that.
No, but he's got time to watch the game. Herschel Walker. He was an incredible
football athletes in America joined the Republican Party. That's basically the point.
Oh, is that what that is and everything? Right. But I was going to bring up just a couple of other things before we bring in our special guests and our other panelists in here. But we did see that the Biden administration is going to renew the COVID public health emergency this week. It will mark the 11th time since the coronavirus arrived after the government declared its presence a national crisis. But they're also saying it might be the last. Senior Biden officials are targeting an end to the emergency designation for COVID as soon as the spring, after debating doing so last summer and taking a pass. 3 people with knowledge of the matter told the website Politico.
So does this mean that you're going to reinitiate that thing for immigration that was preventing people from coming over? Is it the Title 43? Does that mean that that's what's going to happen if it's another emergency that's been declared, Mark?
Who knows what the emergencies are going to declare? Because under the current tentative plan, health officials will quickly renew the emergency declaration for another 90 days before its scheduled expiration on Wednesday. That would give the administration until early February to alert state, because I know you're a big fan of states doing things, and health industry representatives that it plans to end the designation. So I guess that we can go to this notion of state by state as to whether it's a crisis or not a crisis and all in those lines. And the timeline means COVID crisis stage could be declared over as early as April, though the people with knowledge of the matter caution the administration could still issue additional short-term extensions if it needs more time to manage the transition or grapple with the emergence of yet another variant, because we do know that there are various variants out there, and those variants are constantly out there as well. So that's one of the things that I was going to bring up. And then, like I said, I'm going to bring up our special guest. The other thing that I saw is that some people are wondering about the political timing of certain things that are taking place, because there was a drug lord that was hit there in Mexico, and some of the people, and in an article I was reading in the U.S. Today, are thinking that was because of the fentanyl epidemic, which is also tied into the opioid epidemic as well, and how that might be testing the U.S.-Mexico relationships. And some people are wondering whether these timings, because apparently we've gone after these drug lords a couple of times during the time that Biden was going to make visits, whether that was maybe not as accidental as some people might want to think it is, and maybe it was tested or timed in order
And
Well,
Mark,
what's
I
going on?
forgot to talk about so the Biden is meeting. He already went to the border first time since his presidency, and now he's meeting with the president of Mexico. So I was going to mention that. I forgot to mention that, but thank you for bringing that up.
No problem. And I'm going to bring up our special guests as well as others that are on the show as well. But like I was saying, we do have Dr. Stephanie Marcella here, and she is part of a movement that is out there. You know, we got to love these movements that come out all the time. And this is a movement about, we know that a lot of times during the holiday season, and the holiday season for some people starts as early as July 4th. For some people, it starts more maybe like from Halloween to through the New Year's and all in that space. But then there's this whole movement about maybe we need to like sober down or sober up after we've had all of this time of drinking and celebrating and being celebratory during the fall season. So there has been a kind of a movement around called Dry January. But I will let Stephanie tell about this and why it is a good thing to maybe like, you know, just had the fun and maybe now it's time to like just relax and maybe not have as many
Should we
drinks.
bring our guests on? Should we bring the other guests on while Stephanie talks?
Yes.
Well, listen, you know, it is not something for maybe everybody, correct? But it's been about 10 years. It's not just the United States. Other countries have joined in. And we think about Dry January as just a reset. So it's people maybe have been celebrating a little bit too much. And it's a time to just kind of reset yourself the start of the year and see what some of those benefits are. But did you want to introduce the two other guests and then I'll talk a little bit more?
No, if you just go ahead and share because they're part of our regular panel.
Everybody knows who these two are.
Oh, okay.
Good morning.
Hello.
Welcome.
Hi. So what we've found is that the people who tend to like want to do this are people who have been drinking a lot. So individuals who have just think like are seeing some negative impacts from like drinking during the holidays or even, you know, months before and just kind of take the month to reset themselves. There's a ton of research that shows people feel less anxious, people feel less depressed. And that's, I think, the biggest point of it is that you take the month to see how do I feel? How does my body feel without alcohol? And maybe you also kind of develop some other non-alcohol related activities in your life. So getting together with friends and going, I don't know, doing some kind of workout or other things that you can do besides sitting around, like, you know, cooking with your friends or eating with your friends, other things you can do besides centered around like having a beer or having a drink. And, you know, there's about like, I think it's like there's hundreds of thousands of people who are doing this across the United States and in other countries. So I will just say my favorite word is community. And there's just something about being in a community and with this kind of structure that I think people really connect to. So there's a lot of like online forums and you can sign up for it and you're like connecting and talking to other people who are also doing this. And you're sharing like all of the benefits that you're seeing, which I can talk about if you want me to at some point, but they're pretty significant.
I definitely want to hear about the benefits and everything. One thing I was curious about, and I'm sure that the rest of the panel would like to know as well, as I know that you are up there, not that far from Lee Newton Rhodes, who's over there in the New York area, because you're over there at Rutgers University in the Behavioral Healthcare Center and one of the chief psychologists there. So when did you first get involved in this particular field of study, and what drew you into this particular field of study?
It's psychology?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Yes.
God. Well, like I just saw a lot of people struggling as a child, and I was always kind of curious, like what's happening. And I just found psychology, and I personally am like very committed to working with people with serious mental illness. Those are just the best individuals I've ever met. And I think just really out there to fight and deal with stigma. There's so much stigma. There's such a lack of access to care. There are, you know, especially when we think about like more of the underserved communities, they don't have a hard time getting really good quality care. So that's my passion. I want to help people. I work a lot with people with trauma, complex trauma, community violence, PTSD, and substance use disorders.
Well,
Helping people live their best life. Like that's it. We're all trying. We all have stuff going on. There's no question about that. But a little bit of kindness and some really good treatment can go a long way for people.
Well, it sounds to me like I
That's
could be wrong.
definitely. I personally, I'm actually the only madman in my family, and I decided to go into finance because I didn't want to go into medicine. But everybody else in my family are actually in medicine, and my mother and both of her sisters were actually mental health nurses.
Oh, wow.
But my mother actually ran the criminally insane unit, for lack of better words, at one of Australia's largest jails, and then she went for the other one of Australia's largest jails, and now she does country nursing with communities. So I do know a little bit. I've obviously never practiced that field, but I've certainly been very exposed to mental health issues, and I think that it is a sad reflection of Western society that we have actually dropped the ball on this. There's a lot of people that are struggling. And the biggest thing, and I'll say to anyone who's watching, the biggest thing is the stigma. If you're having a problem, do go out and seek help. And for a lot of people, I think almost all of us will have a moment in our lives, or a few moments in our lives where it's a crisis mode where we just feel totally overwhelmed, and we need to reach out, especially men. Women tend to have a bit more of a community around them. Men just suck it up. We're going to do the manly thing, and drown our sorrows in the bottle. So, I think mental health is definitely a really important thing to be part of.
Yeah. And a lot of times with men, we see like anger issues, or, because anger is an acceptable feeling culturally for men, even though it can lead to kind of disastrous consequences, right? Because for the people you're surrounded with, for your family, for your relationships, and also doesn't really feel good to get that kind of like worked up. So just kind of normalizing, I mean, we need such policy change and such system level change to address this. But really kind of like that early education and intervention to like educate people that really some of these simple concepts that just as a society we've kind of gotten away from, and I think like we're so focused on the masks that we wear. I do a lot around suicide prevention and working with families when they lose a child to suicide. And how do we have like really hard but real conversations? Like we need to have real conversations because there's really deadly consequences if we don't. And alcohol is a coping skill,
I produced a film in California called Anhero, and I thought that wasn't grammatically correct, and I spoke to the director about it. He actually told me the meme behind Anhero. People can Google that themselves if they'd like to know. But it was a very interesting thing because youth suicide per capita in the Western world, the highest rates are actually in New Zealand. And New Zealand's a beautiful country. You go there and you're astounded just how gorgeous the country is, but there's a lot of unhappy youth there. So I think, looking at people at different age groups, what they're going through, and also the differences between genders. So males will deal with things differently to females. They need to be able to be around people who aren't going to tell them that they're wrong, but can actually understand what they're going through. And invariably, I think the trans community is going to need some help as well. And in a way that, look, I can't relate. Dan Worthington's not going to be able to relate to this. We don't know what they're going through. We don't know the pressures they're going through. But clearly the rates of self-harm is very, very high in that community. So we do need to actually look at how we're addressing these things. We need to make sure that mental health, in my opinion, mental health should be a normal part of the healthcare system. It's not, it shouldn't be some part where it's very stigmatized. And unfortunately, that is the case in the United States. It is the case in Canada to a little bit less of a degree, but it is the case in Canada. It's certainly the case here in Australia. And look, we as societies need to really address this and take it seriously.
And Dr. Stephanie, one of the things I was curious about, and I've actually brought up on one of our other shows, I might have even brought up on a couple of other shows, is to what Shaquille is talking about. We do know that there are a lot of folks that are seeing images, whether it's on television, whether it's in movies, whether it's in video games, and then they simulate that. I know that there was an incident, I think it was reported on one of our network channels, where a person had watched a video simulation of a hanging and then decided that they were going to do that themselves as well. So I just wondering your thoughts around that and just how we can deal with that. And I also know that there is another group, and I can't remember if Dan is part of that group or not, that is the veterans that also don't seem to be getting a lot of mental health support when they come back. But I'd just love to know your thoughts around that.
So sorry, I have a super loud dog who's barking at a tree. But so just to kind of comment,
has the dog been drinking? That's the question. Is that why it's barking?
Maybe he might have been drinking. So I'm not sure yet. Possibly. I'm going to evaluate him when we get off here. But there are, like you said, there are so many vulnerable groups older adults are one of the most vulnerable groups that we don't often talk about enough, in terms of like the highest risk for suicide. Communities of color are high risk, underserved communities, veterans, absolutely. I think part of the challenge is how do we support the healthcare workforce to deal with the complexities of individuals? Like humans are like, we're absolutely bonkers. We all have so much going on. We're super complex. And you have this overstressed, overworked system that is super underfunded. Reimbursement rates don't compare anywhere near to the reimbursement rates that you would charge, for other kind of real high risk health behaviors in the medical field. And so a lot of providers are like, pay out of pocket and who can afford that? Upper class, sometimes upper middle class can afford that, but individuals who really have all of these other kind of like diversity, equity issues aren't really able to even access that care. But I think there's a big problem with social media. There's no doubt about it. Even that, observational learning, it's one of the biggest ways that we learn. So that's why we do a lot around safe messaging when we do lose a youth or an adult to suicide, and really not talking about how that individual died. People tend to look for like an oversimplification. So they want like an answer as to why this happened. There's never just one answer because humans aren't that simple. But I'm definitely concerned with like what the youth are seeing and how that's being monitored online, because that's how they really find out how to take their lives, by watching it online. And if you have a vulnerable kid and they see something like that, and they've had just like something really horrific recently happened, coupled with lots of other things, you have a real high risk situation. And you have a system that's not screening these kids. Like, we need to be right in there with the pediatricians working alongside of them, because that's where kids are coming.
There's that loud dog again. But coming back to that and everything, one of the things I was going to ask is, I know that there was a time when cigarettes were advertised heavily on television and everything. I want to come back to the dry January conversation, but I was wondering about the impact of commercials and the impact of media on alcoholic and alcohol consumption, because I know that you can't watch a TV show or a movie without there being a commercial for some sort of drink that is featured in there. So I was just wondering, has that made it easier or harder for y'all to push the dry January message, because there is constant bombardment to get, the Corona or the Heineken or whatever other drink of choice that people have, the various wines and things of that nature?
Yeah, it's marketing, it's glorification.
This is one of Australia's best wines, and I don't care about your dry July, your dry January. I'm going to drink it.
I'll see you in February.
But to be fair, we have Australia Day coming up, so you can't really do it in January here in Australia. Plus, it is our summer, so yes.
Yeah,
Shaquille, you'll do one day, but you won't do the month.
Nick's come on. As soon as I've held up a bottle of wine, Nick's has come on to tell me off. So that's all right. Stephanie, back to you. I will note, though, that I feel like this is a network conspiracy against me. We're talking about cigarettes. I'm a smoker. We're talking about not drinking, and I'm a drinker. I'm feeling very hard done by here. Did my mother bribe you, Nick? What's going on?
We're all against you're just so persecuted. I can't stand it.
I am. The person
Shaquille, you refuse to go to a therapist, so we're bringing the therapist to you.
That's great. I'm here. Oh, you would be fun to work with.
Look, there are some people, Shaquille, that are too far gone that even the best therapist in the world can't help. Okay, and
Not
by
you.
definition, you fit that profile. So
I tried to make you a Mormon. Nothing works.
I will say in my defense, it is 2 o'clock in the morning, so I'm going to enjoy my grades.
That guy over there.
Hold on a second.
I will say, when you said what you did for a living, I actually have looked over at the bookshelf and I see one of my mother's books, the DSM-5 clinical cases. So if you think that working with me is going to be
I've
fun,
read DSM-5 from cover to cover.
I'll pretend to have things.
I have read DSM-5. I even read DSM-4, which came before 5, from cover to cover. Okay, and Shaquille, you're in that place which they call the hopeless causes or abnormal psychology. Okay,
no, that's right. I'm the one they send the students in to study.
And you're off the end, so you have no chance.
No, but let's hear from Stephanie.
I think he's got great energy. He's kind of very funny.
Yeah, I know. It is.
Who has great energy? This guy? This guy?
Oh, Jack,
He's
yeah,
from
yeah.
Australia. They're all like that. They're all the
And a
same.
great accent. I mean, come on.
No.
No.
What happens? They were rejects from England. They got rid of them. They sent them to Australia, which is
No,
what we
I'm still
should do
British.
here.
No,
I'm
no,
still
they were
British.
convicts from England.
They're
Let's be
convicts,
clear.
right? Yeah, and see,
No,
what
not
we need to
my
do
lot,
is send
Dan,
our
Dan, not
convicts
my
over to
lot.
his country. He loves them.
My lot were never
Come over there.
convicts. We may have been slightly enslaved, but we were never convicts. We come from a very good part of Britain called British India. Stephanie, over to you. The floor is yours.
Here comes
Yeah,
history.
please, before these to be Stephanie's.
I'm not
Okay,
quite
don't
sure
listen
what
to his
to say.
rendition.
But
Please, no. They're convicts. Just
It's Bash Kill Day.
okay. Let's talk to somebody who knows what they're doing, which isn't you, Shaquille. So let's listen to Stephanie.
Yeah.
no, I was just gonna say that I would never push anything on anyone. Like, to me, Dry January is just it's an invitation. If it's something that you've been thinking about, maybe consider trying it, and seeing how it goes. Seeing, like, are you, think about it. This is for people who maybe aren't sleeping well. Alcohol impacts sleep. So maybe you're having trouble concentrating, or maybe you're gaining weight because alcohol has a lot of sugar in it. So if it, when you think about, do you want more energy? Like, these are some of the things that, like, just saying, I'm going to take a month, I'm going to pause, I'm going to reset, an invitation to see what impact or not. Maybe you'll be like, no, everything is completely the same. And that's okay too. It's kind of like, I view it as like an experiment to see, like, what gets better or doesn't get better. Is my mind clear? Am I sleeping better? Maybe you're feeling anxious. Alcohol in the moment may make you feel less anxious, but overall, what it does to the brain is it actually increases anxiety. It increases depression. It increases symptoms of sadness. So, if you take a pause from that, you might notice some changes, or you might not. So I'm never invested in whatever the outcome is. To me, it's just an experiment.
Let me ask
see what
you-
happens.
You're way too nice to this guy. What you should say, Dr. Stephanie, you should say, look, if you don't stop your drinking, we're going to drop you into the Billabong, okay, and surround you with a bunch of kangaroos. He'll listen to
Billabong.
There's plenty of grog out there. We can make
Once upon a
it. We can.
Hold on a
we
second.
can-
Shaquille,
we can
I have a
make our
question for Stephanie.
we can make our own out there, Nick. So that's not going to change. I also would just remind you, I used to own a pub or a bar, as you call them over there. So when we have our dry Julys, when we have it, it was terrible. Except my regulars used to keep going down. But not to make light of it. Look, obviously, I enjoy a drink. But Stephanie, I think an important question for people who perhaps are struggling is, if they actually do have perhaps an alcohol problem or an alcohol dependence, what are the options? And the reason I ask that, again, I don't have this issue. I enjoy having a drink, but I'll certainly stop whenever I need to. And to me, it's a social thing generally. But what happens to somebody who says, "Look, I'm really struggling. What do I do? I come home from work. How am I going to survive?" What's the options for them? And I know that from past experience, people have said to me that they've gone in and seen we'll call them a shrink over here in Australia. They've gone in and seen someone, and they've ended up being prescribed things like Valium. And they're like, well, I don't want to take Valium. I might as well just have a drink.
No.
So, what are the options? And one of the things I'll just say to clarify this question. We see this
have a
when-
drink with the Valium.
We have an
We
expert
see
from
when people
Canada,
become
Sasha
professional.
Starr, since he was formerly from the Soviet Union. He is an
Great.
vodka. He can help you out.
We see this a lot when people become institutionalized. Something that I have some real problems with. Once they go into jail or into a mental health facility, not only can they not drink anymore, if they have any drug problems, they have to go cold turkey off their drugs. But they also can't smoke anymore because there's this big non-smoking thing. And I'm like, these people are stressed out to the max. They can't have a drink. They can't smoke. This is a bad idea. But for people who aren't in that circumstance, who are trying to get off, what can they do? What can they do to perhaps reduce their alcohol intake? Where can they go? They don't want to go to Alcoholics Anonymous and go through 13 steps. They don't want to bare their souls to somebody. They just want to perhaps drink less. How do they achieve that?
Yeah. So, just one of the things, if a person is someone who is drinking excessively, you don't want to just stop drinking, because that actually, you could die from that. So if you're stopping drinking and you're noticing that you're having like tremors and you're getting nauseous or you're having like night sweats, you really want to go see your doctor. And what we'll do is we follow it's called like a harm reduction model.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
And when someone comes to see me, like I never just assume this person has a trouble with substances. Like we really do say, what would it be like? You're drinking 7 days a week? You know, how about, what do you think about trying drink 4 days a week?
It takes,
And
like, I mean, for
kinda-
me, one thing for me, like, and it sounds really crazy, but I get so busy between my media, my political work, that I drink literally only twice a year during the week of Thanksgiving and Christmas. And then the whole year I don't drink. And it took a lot of discipline for that. So even when I go to a social event, I'll have a ginger ale or cranberry juice. And this has been about 9 years, but I used to drink more just at social occasions, parties, receptions. But it takes a lot of discipline because it's so easy to grab a drink, and the irony is,
This is why Sasha and I are such great friends, because almost everyone on the panel basically doesn't drink. Mark does occasionally, I think, but Sasha and I are the only ones, I think, that enjoy one. But look, Stephanie, another question there is, I've noticed there's a different culture for drinking in different countries, certainly Germany, Australia, place like that. We drink, and if you come to a big business meeting and then you don't come and have a drink with us afterwards, we're going to look at you like, you're weird. I don't want to work with you. That's sort of our culture. So, it's one thing for Steve to say, look, have some discipline. I think that most Americans still believe the 18th Amendment is in force. It's my impression of America. They've forgotten about the 21st. What would you suggest to people where alcohol is a really significant part of both their social and business?
Only in Utah.
No, but here's the thing. There's
Love
the
that dog.
culture of the country. There's the culture of where you live. There's the culture of your family, right? There's so many different pieces, and like what alcohol means and doesn't mean. First of all, I would suggest that people take a pause, take a step back, and start thinking about like what is alcohol costing them in their lives. And if it's costing relationships, if it's costing being on time for work, then you got to kind of like weigh these things out and, make a decision. Is this something that I can reduce? And then you'll know if you can or not. Or is this something that I really need to get some support from? And so support can look different for different people depending on where it is they want to get it from. I am a huge fan of going to, obviously, like a psychologist or a therapist to figure out, what kind of level of care might you need? But the other piece, and this I'll say, and this I think goes for any culture, is what are you getting from drinking? People a lot of times are drinking to mask other things. So whether it's things that happened in childhood or traumas that they haven't dealt with, or, struggles at home in their marriage that they don't really want to deal with. So they go out, have some drinks, things feel better, but ultimately, is it making it better? Right. So it's kind of like alcohol is there giving us something. Now, maybe in your situation, it's a way to connect with colleagues at work. And so how can you be creative and still be a part of those events with colleagues, but also make sure that you're not kind of losing other things that, if you really have a problem with alcohol, will start to happen.
Stephanie?
No simple answer.
Yeah, I just have a question and an observation. During the pandemic, when a lot of businesses were shut down and only essential businesses were allowed to be open, bars and liquor stores were allowed to stay open.
They're
Do you want to
essential.
comment on why we consider that such to be an integral part of our culture?
I think that we live in a culture that wants things to be fixed, wants that Amazon delivery to arrive in an hour, wants to feel better immediately when we're sad, doesn't allow ourselves to have access. Like, it's okay to be sad, people. You can be sad and then you won't be. If you let yourself feel it, it will move like a cloud. If you mask it and drink alcohol because you're stressed and scared and sad, it's not going away. It's going to manifest itself in your body. That creates illness. You can't disconnect the psychology from cancer and diabetes and all the other health things that happen to us. We are one whole person and it's all connected. And so we will keep it in our bodies. I think it says a lot about where we are as a society. We're a quick fix. American society, at least, is a quick fix society. We want answers. We want solutions. We don't want to feel anything. And I think that showed it to you right there.
Well, I'd say the Western world is mostly the same, Stephanie. It's not just the United States, but people like to unwind. You've had a stressful day, catch up with your friends, you have a couple of drinks, have a game of pool, something like that. That's probably more men's way of doing things. Girls, they'll sit there and have a glass of wine and, I don't know, do whatever girls do. But I do wonder sometimes whether some of these movements, they come across as being, you're just the fun police. You want us to stop drinking. We've got to cut sugar out of our diet. We're not supposed to smoke anymore. We should go for a run. We should do 3 half-an-hour sessions on the treadmill each week. Yeah, we all know these things, but, we don't want to. We want to go and do the things that are fun. And I'm sure that you've probably heard this before. Are you the fun police, Stephanie? Or, is there ways to be able to have a drink, have a cigarette and enjoy yourself?
Well, I mean, listen, there are some studies that show have a glass of wine could be good to your health too, right? So it's not that you can't have anything. It's a balance. I think it comes down to the individual person. What do you value? What do you want in your life? And what's stopping you from getting there? And if you're telling me that what's stopping you from getting there is that you're spending all your extra money on alcohol and hanging out at the bar at night when you could be doing these other things that are really what you want, then we have to talk about that. If you're saying that you have a glass of wine once or twice a week and you're moving towards the things that you want, then that's not something we really need to talk about. We probably need to talk about other things. So to me, it all comes down to, if you do this, this will probably happen. If you do this, this will probably happen. So which one do you want to do? It's never like pointing fingers. How do you want to feel? Because if you sit on your couch eating bags of Doritos, hey, I would eat cinnamon buns if I could, but I'm going to feel like crap. I'm going to gain all this weight. I'm going to feel like crap. I don't want to feel like crap. I want to have energy. I want to sleep well. So you know what? Maybe I'll have some, I don't know, a cinnamon bun or donut like once a month. I'm not going to completely deprive myself of it. But if I'm someone who can't eat just one donut and I got to like pound a box of 12, then I might need to be a little more thoughtful about that. Because if it's going to send me into like a sugar spiral.
Hold on a second.
Can I make a proposal, Mark? I think when we look at politics, sorry, Stephanie, don't respond to this. This is for everybody else. When we look at politics around the world, but we're talking about America mostly at the moment, what we've heard from Stephanie is that people that drink too much will often not achieve a lot. They'll end up just drinking and they don't do the things they're supposed to do. They're going to feel like crap when they eat too much, cinnamon sticks and donuts and Doritos, etc. I actually think that we should make a proposal that the taxpayer just sends copious amounts of alcohol to Washington, D.C., get all the politicians so drunk that they can't actually achieve anything. And I think
they're already
will be better off for
They
it.
do that without
Already,
drinking.
yeah.
They're doing that already.
Yeah, no, but they need more.
Hey,
They need more.
hey,
We need them completely stupefied so they can't do anything else.
Hey, Dr. Stephanie, I did have a very quick question.
Notice
It was actually
he's
based on our
interfering
animal
with-
in the background and everything. And it's actually, hold on a second. Because I did have a quick question to Dr. Stephanie based on the animal in the background as well as something that Shaquille said and everything. And I'd love to hear her comments on both of these. One is, are you a proponent of, because I know some people love their pets. I've had pets in the past, don't have any currently. But are you a proponent of taking your animal to the psychologist as well? Because if the dog was barking, I was wondering, does the animal need some help in that department
Therapy.
also? So I was wondering if you're a proponent of animal psychology. And I was also wondering about the substituting, which is what Shaquille was talking about, substituting one addiction for another. Because I do know that sometimes people will, give up the alcohol and then they'll go start smoking, chain amounts of cigarettes, or they'll give up alcohol and they'll go to eat tons of candies and Hershey's or whatever else, and they'll substitute one for another. So I was wondering, even in this dry January, how do you deal with that?
Alcohol is a gateway drug.
Well, okay, so here's what I'll say. Training a dog is really training the owner. You don't train a dog. You train the owner of the dog to know how to handle the dog. It's simple, basic behavior modification. Some days I'm really good at it. Some days I need a little bit more training. So I mean, I don't, I'm a fan of looking at what the family needs and figuring it out. I don't tell anybody what to do. It's just like, here's what it is, here's what's happening. What do you think? And then how do we get there? Kind of guiding that process. Yes, people tend to just get rid of one addiction and pull the other if they haven't dealt with what's causing them to need something in their life to mask whatever it is they're trying to mask. Like we all wear, some of us wear, a lot of us wear different masks until we can really be authentic and genuine and look at the stuff that like we might not want to look at. Even the parts of the self that we don't really like about ourselves, because we all have them. we're all these imperfectly perfect humans. And the more real we can be with ourselves and with each other, the less likely we're going to need something like shopping, like process addictions, or gambling, or sex to fill those voids. You know,
I'll be off now, guys. Catch you later.
You need to come back
Shaquille,
to
take care.
your next group therapy session, Shaquille. Your next group therapy session starts at least
Hey.
later on
Yeah,
today.
well, the group session will be like 10 psychologists and just me. That's what will happen. I'm
Yeah, I don't know
I'm
if that's
fighting.
good.
I'm going to fight back now, Stephanie.
No,
what does
no,
it
he's
say
going
about
to
you?
trade
If you believe
securities.
that trading a dog, you've really got to train the owner. What does it say about you that your dog's barking at a tree?
oh, it says I need some serious help. I'm
There
serious.
we go.
No, but I know this. I know. Listen, we are all in a process with stuff. It says that I need someone to come train me on how to get my dog to stop barking.
Well,
Because even though I intellectually know it, I can't like get it to work in like my everyday life. It just says that I'm inhuman.
and Shaquille
Yeah,
literally
notice-
could help with you
notice
that
the
he's bounced off and
atmosphere
everything, but he
quiet down
was
as soon as
a
possible.
greyhound racer and he's raced greyhound, so he might know how to train that dog and everything.
Oh,
even though I
good.
doubt
See,
he
I'll
can.
help him and he can help me.
Oh, no.
I am
have
actually working in the background, but no, I'm a
He's
cat
trading
person.
securities. He trades millions of dollars a day. Okay, so we're talking. He's sitting there on his Quotron board, moving stocks all around the world.
I haven't-
See,
I
that's
haven't done millions.
That's
yet.
what really
pretty
does
cool.
for you. Don't tell anybody.
I'm
I know.
impressed. I
But
couldn't
no,
do that.
I own, I don't know how many, probably 200 dogs at the moment, but I am actually a cat person, and that's why I had the regulator ring me today and
Hey,
asked me about
Stephanie,
one of my
Google
dogs. I
him.
had
His
no
bloody
idea.
dog made $1 million. $1 million. Google Shaquille Latmer,
I
Australia.
am Googling
dog.
you. Okay. Well,
This
I
dog
need help here.
Made what him
Dog
$1
racing.
billion bloody dollars because he bought a dog that won the biggest race in Australia.
So-
Not the biggest race in
Australia-
Australia. No, it's not just the biggest race in Australia. That's the biggest race in the world.
Yeah, $1 million in your pocket because of your dog. You should love your dog.
Yeah.
You
No,
like
so,
cats.
so
But
he
what,
does.
what I will say about it, sorry, no, I'll just quickly say this. But what I will say about it is that there is actually an animal rights issue, and I've actually dealt with. I've been quite lucky because protesters don't generally protest me, because whilst I'm in the industry and I don't agree with them on things like banning the sport altogether, like places like Florida has. I do think that we need to make improvements, and I think that animal welfare is really important. And that's my view really across the board. I always talk about having a balance. Social media is great, but we do need to have a look at the harm that it can cause, especially young people. You know, it's about having that balance. Drinking is great, but I don't think we should ban drinking like you guys tried to do with prohibition. But of course, you need to look at people that, perhaps are going to develop problems. Same thing with drugs. Unlike most people on this panel, I actually think that drugs, for the most part, most recreational drugs, should probably be legal. We should probably, question things like fentanyl. Now, that's my view. Most people don't share that view. That's fine. That's just my personal opinion. But we should also make sure that people that have the tendency to abuse those drugs, somebody who's not going to just enjoy them on the every now and then on a weekend, those people that are likely to develop addiction problems are going to be able to access the help that they need. That's my view. I'm fairly libertarian in my views. So, that's how I feel about it. That's how I feel with the animals. Sorry, Dan, to cut in.
I just would say I totally agree with you. I'm also very libertarian in my views. So I agree with everything you just said. I think you nailed it. Really.
Stephanie, to put
I
this in
disagree with
perspective,
everything
though,
he says, but I just do that
this,
all the time.
this is a
I
guy
like
that
Stephanie.
went to
Look
the
up at him in
casino
New
one
York.
night, won $350,000 and went and bought a Bentley. So
That was an off-air conversation.
This
That was
person
an
is
Okay, so
exceptional.
we're uncovering the real
He's not
Shaquille.
like
Tell them
other
about
people.
your Bentley, Shaquille. Come on. You got to come
you got
clean on
a
the show.
beautiful
Tell them
Bentley.
about the millions of dollars you make your Bentley and your bloody $1 million dog.
I'm going to have to increase my security service when I come over there. You realize this, right?
This is even worse. I think
This
he
is
got
just
a visa
on
to
a whim,
come
right? So he goes to
here.
the casino, he makes all this money and goes buys a Bentley. I think it's great. If I could do that, I'd love to, but I can't. And I think
No, let me just clarify. I was already going to buy the Bentley. I was already
okay.
going to buy the Bentley. But what had happened was the night before, it doesn't matter anyway. Yes, I won some money the night before, which just happened to be enough to buy the Bentley.
Wow.
cash for the Bentley. Okay,
think it's
okay.
funny.
Bring
I think
out the
it's
violins for this guy. I want enough money the day before to pay cash for my Bentley. I just feel so sorry.
Well,
Gee.
and the thing was, the casino was the only place I could get the cash for it because it was a weekend. So I went to look at the Bentley on the Sunday, the idea that I'd pay for it on the Monday. And because look, it doesn't matter. Why are we talking this? This is an off-air conversation. It's not even supposed to be discussed on air.
No, we're good. We're
I'm
actually going to move on to
leasing
something else really
I'm
quickly.
leasing my Atlas.
Yeah, you're releasing everything.
Killing.
But we do have Sasha, and I definitely wanted to hear just really quickly what's going on. I know we've got the show that'll be dealing with the Ukraine, but if you can just let us know what's happening in that war. I do know that you sent a link earlier where some of our past leaders, Condoleezza Rice being one of them, have said that we definitely need to send more arms over to Ukraine so that they can win that war and win that against that invasion from Putin and Russia. And that article also talked about the fact that some of the other countries that needed to chip in further. And I know that Nick has said that, as has definitely Dan Worthington, and I want to say even David Walker and others that have been on the show have brought it up as well, whether it's this show or some of our other shows, how some of the other countries need to be doing better in terms of their military supplies for the Ukraine. And I don't know if Stephanie's got any opinions about that particular war and all in that line, but if she does, she can jump in as well.
Well, first of all, with all the great help that U.S. providing for Ukraine, if you take it and really analyze what is the amount of total military budget of U.S., it's negligible amount, period. It's nothing more, nothing less. It's completely negligible. Now, it's a time that the country which threatens already 3 generations of humankind with the total annihilation, thermonuclear war, it's now about time to finish this threat and once and for all. And beautiful situation is developing that, in fact, it's not even US, it's not UK, it's not France, it's Ukraine who is doing that, paying the price of their soldiers, of their heroic fighters. So, in fact, the West, including US, can crush Russia without spending even one life of their soldiers or officers. Just let Ukraine do its job and stop talking about, oh, how much and for how long or so on. This is for dumb people with short-sighted vision or no vision at all. And these people should just shut up once and for all, because they don't understand really what's going on right now.
But Sasha, when you say that, unfortunately, you do have media, especially Fox, that sort of that go down that line and talk that way, and they are influential over people that aren't going to know the complexities of the issues. I mean, I've said to you many times, I learned a lot about the Ukraine and that conflict because of you and because of your show that you do. But this unfortunately is the view of a lot of people. I've often said, and you've heard me say this before, that I don't think the West did enough. How do Ukrainians feel about the idea that if it was another country that was protected directly by NATO, that there would actually be a direct response from the West? Here's NATO saying, if you cross any further, we'll react, but we're not going to do too much now. We're going to send stuff through Poland, etc. What's the feeling on the ground there? How do they feel about that?
Shaquille, you have to look at the reality of what's happening right now. It's being member of NATO. It's in a way a fiction, because if you take countries like Romania or Hungary, yes, they're members of NATO and they will be protected. When, against whom, nobody knows. Here is Ukraine, who is trying very hard to become part of the Western culture, whether it's European Union or NATO, and is putting on the line hundreds of thousands of lives. Complete infrastructure has been destroyed in Ukraine. It's becoming unlivable territory for the time being, at least. And here is the West When you have in Fox News, you have good bookkeepers probably, right? But they have nothing to do with the real situation. Thank God there is a such thing as industrial military complex in the United States. They don't give a damn about Fox News and what these idiots and lunatics are saying. They are doing their job. And that, by the way,
Want money.
that will make America great again. The military industrial complex. They will make America great again.
Is this the same
Yeah.
military industrial complex that the left has railed against in previous years?
Oh, yeah.
I won't go into that, but Sash, let me ask you this about Russia. We've talked in recent weeks. We've been talking about potentially Putin not being there anymore, whether that happens naturally or whatever. What is the future of Russia, do you think? What happens after this? What do you think the leadership's going to be? Is it going to be a real change, or is it going to be more of the same sort of thing? What do you predict for the future?
The present Russia has to stop to exist. And it has to be completely reinvented, reorganized, and become a friendly country to its neighbors, to the West, preferably, if possible. And I think with the new leadership, it will be possible. And that's why, of course, it has to be denuclearized completely. So the threat of the nuclear war will be eliminated once and for all. That's what will happen to Russia. When and how long, how much time we are talking about, it's unclear, because the Putin's days are numbered. He will be taken out either by his own people, or as a result of Ukraine is kicking out all Russian forces, and his own people, his closest friends, they will tell him, Vladimir Vladimirovich, it's about enough. You got it all wrong. You are the loser. Out. I think it may happen actually this year, because right now they're fighting so hard for this Bakhmut, the little indescribable place near Donetsk region, and Russians cannot get even an inch. They cannot get an inch farther. However, the good news for Ukraine is that the Bradleys are coming. Once the Bradleys will be there, the next step will be the German heavy tanks, Leopard. Abrams is a lot of logistical problem to get there. It will happen, but later. The Leopards will come first. And once they're getting a lot of French weapons, and they're just getting ready. I think no later than March, Ukraine will go for offensive. But they're very smart. They're preparing it very carefully. They're not rushing anywhere. They're preparing. They're operating in small group. They exhaust Russian army with attacks here and there. They don't know when and what to expect. And that strategy works wonderfully. But Ukraine is definitely preparing for major offensive, probably in March.
Hey, just really quickly, I don't know if Stephanie's got any thoughts around the Ukraine war, but I had mentioned earlier about the opioid crisis, and I know that that's been another crisis that folks have thought about, and I know that that is one that is in the thought patterns of a lot of people in the field of psychology and the field of medicine. So just wondering your thoughts around that. If you've got any thoughts around the Ukrainian crisis, I'd love to hear those as well.
Well, I definitely have a lot of thoughts around the opioid crisis and what needs to be done, and really just the concern about fentanyl and how it's being put into substances and drugs, and really just taking our youth, So, just listening to all your guys' thoughts on the Ukraine. Obviously, been following it.
Stephanie, is the government taking it seriously?
I don't know, but I do know that not enough's being done. I mean, we need to shake up the system. And it has to start from the policy level. It has to start from the White House. It has to start from the highest of levels and then trickle it down. But it's also such a funding issue too. I mean, it's so layered and so complicated. but we can start to address it and tackle it in such different ways. It just seems like
What do
so many
you do,
times
though,
we just
Stephanie,
throw a
if-
whole
if-
bunch of money at things, and like who's, you know, and how are we putting it together? And I'm sure there's task force working on this, but how are we really putting it together to address it at different kind of pieces, and then at like the everyday level that like we're seeing?
What do you do, Stephanie? Like, you know, the US government, as have most Western countries around the world, have all joined on this war on drugs. And like most of these wars they talk about, the war on poverty, the war on this, the war on that, it means nothing. They don't achieve anything. Do you increase criminal penalties? I mean, that doesn't seem to work. And I know that a lot of
I don't think so.
people say, well, you can't just let people do whatever they want. You know, we shouldn't say because we're losing, we should criminalize it. But the reality is you've got people that are, you know, doing cocaine or doing, you know, other types of drugs that are stimulants that aren't expecting fentanyl to be there. And, you know, they're ODing. And you're not just seeing that in the United States, you're actually seeing that in Canada. I actually know somebody whose son, who's slightly younger than me, was, you know, doing some coke at a party, which, you know, we can all say, oh, you shouldn't have been doing it, blah, 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 pass your moral judgment. But a lot of people in their 20s and 30s will do this stuff. It's a party drug with like ecstasy and, you know, like these other drugs. And, you know, people generally have a pretty good handle on how much they can take. All of a sudden, it's adulterated with fentanyl and they OD and they die. So, you know, what is the solution? And is a potential solution going to be, like I suggest, one, making it legal, and two, actually holding the medical fraternity more responsible? Because you cannot, in my view, have people that come into hospital with serious ailments, who have been prescribed morphine, who have been prescribed other type of opiates, who have, through no fault of their own, developed an addiction, and then their doctors say, well, I can't prescribe it to you anymore because now it's just an addiction. It's no longer being used for painkillers. They can't survive. They're having some real issues. And rather than being weaned off it, they can just go to their local street dealer and buy I don't know anything about drugs, buy a bag for $25. You know, this is a problem. And I read a report the other day that said the easiest place, if you go to any Western country and you'd like to score drugs, the easiest place to do it is at high schools. That you can walk into any high school and talk to a couple of kids and they'll be able to hook you up with some drugs. That's the easiest place to do it if you don't know otherwise.
It's the worst
problem.
Yep. It's the worst crisis affecting the U.S. I mean, you know, in West Virginia, my home state, opioid number one problem. Attorney General Josh Stein in North Carolina, who we hope to bring on the show, is, you know, actually negotiating huge settlements with the drug companies that are actually going to the counties to help them address this crisis. But I don't know.
But my fear, Steve, is that the proposals that are being put forth is basically a proposal to limit access to drugs or to make it harder to access. What I'm suggesting is that there's a lot of people, especially when we talk about opioids, you know, people, as I understand it, people don't generally just fall into opioid addictions, but most people who are younger will go for more stimulant type drugs, cocaine, ecstasy, all those sorts of things as party drugs. Often what we're seeing is that people have had an illness or they've had some sort of severe injury. They've been prescribed narcotics in hospital, and then they haven't actually been given any real treatment to wean them off, and then they end up becoming drug addicts.
And no treatment to address what it's like to live with chronic pain. Some people do have chronic pain. Listen, it's a financial issue. It's a money issue. It's a money maker. It's a stigma issue. Have you ever been with a loved one or with anybody when they go into the emergency room because they're struggling with something, how you are treated? If they look at you as someone who's there for substances or someone who was trying to get into treatment for recovery or has a mental health issue, you're treated very differently than someone who's coming in with like chest pains in some places. I don't like to, some places do a really good job at it, but overall, our system is not equipped. And there are places in the United States that you wouldn't send your loved one to. If you wouldn't send your child, your partner, your loved one to this facility for treatment, we shouldn't be sending anybody there. You know, there are places that, because the laws aren't really written to in a way that I think is helpful to people with substance use disorders, that capitalize and take advantage of their vulnerability and weaknesses in order to bill and make money. And then, you know, these individuals, of course, they're not going to get any better. or they're waiting, they can't even get into care, or the system isn't advanced or well trained or supported enough to even know how to engage somebody to think about, hey, maybe this is something I should look at. And you're right. Just putting someone, incarcerating them isn't going to do anything for that problem. Rather than wrapping them with services, supporting them, there's a ton of programs and research that shows like what's really helpful to help a community and individuals in this area. It's just the resources to get it, the cost of that, and then letting go of the cost that people are getting from all these drugs.
So, Stephanie, if you leave the politics and the money aside, and you had a magic wand and you could do anything that you want to do, didn't matter how much it costs, didn't matter about the politics, what would you want to do? I note that in Washington State, for example, they actually have injecting clinics where they are providing people with drug addictions with pure drugs on a prescription type basis, and they're actually seeing less of them going to jail, less of them committing crimes, a better healthcare outcomes, and weaning them off. That seems to be a successful program. What would you say? You got a magic wand? Doesn't matter about money, doesn't matter about politics. You can do whatever you want to do.
I would support that. I would support that. My magic wand would be to look at policy to rewrite. I mean, simple things is like if we want to put a psychologist working with a pediatrician, the people come in and have to do a double copay in some states. That's absolutely ridiculous. It's one service. So laws and policy can go so way. Just a couple can go so can take us so far. I would really address stigma on such a national level. Education. I would start social emotional learning as early as preschool so that people don't need, the bigger question is, what the hell is happening in our society that we need a bunch of drugs and alcohol to feel okay to live? That's
Stephanie. At the same time, though, Hollywood, the movies, they're glorifying all these things that we're talking about, which is really not helpful for people. How do we fight that?
We fight it through supporting families and communities to educate youth and children and teens. Like just going back to what we were talking about with suicide, a teenager before they have an attempt or take their life typically tells a friend. They don't tell mom or dad. They tell their friend. How come we're not educating nationally, internationally, kids to know if your friend says this to you, here's what you might want to do? I
understand. I get that, but all the musicians in the movies are glorifying and telling them it's cool, and they're showing them in their parties and their cultures. How do we tell kids, especially teenagers?
We're
that's not cool.
Run out of time.
Yeah,
we're about to run out of time. Let Sasha ask this question. Stephanie, we're going to need you back. I think we need to have another show with you.
Yeah, I have to leave for another show about Ukraine, actually. So the only thing what I want to say is that instead of worrying about emotional problems or so on, people need financial education. If people are involved in finance, if they are doing well, for example, how would I think about, for example, killing myself today? Today's Tuesday. On Friday, I have option expiration, so I have to leave at least until Friday. I can't afford to die today.
I gotta say, Sasha, there's something to that, though. I'm not kidding. Because
on a vacation,
the brain changes, we keep you safe for a couple of days. We may be able to get you out of that mode.
Absolutely. And another
I like that idea.
Every day I play 10 speed games with my wife, and that keeps me agile. Yesterday I lost 7-3, but I may do better today or tomorrow. Okay.
It's been
no problem. Dr. Stephanie, a couple of things. One, I know that maybe Steve has a very quick closeout and everything, but I was going to say, I do hope, like Shaquille, that you will make a return and everything. And definitely, Steve, tomorrow, we might have to talk. Well, actually, we got 2 more guests tomorrow, but maybe Thursday, we might have to talk about Bill Gates considering it West Virginia. And apparently he's also doing it in Wyoming for some nuclear energy efforts. So apparently Bill Gates is looking at your old area of West Virginia for some nuclear energy initiatives.
All hail Bill Gates. He knows everything. Oh, fantastic.
Stephanie, thank you for being on the show. We'll be back next week for another edition. And I won't close out today since we're over time, but we'll be talking about the Brazil attacks, the looking at the 118th Congress, what they're going to be working on the next few months or not working on. And things have quieted out, and then politically, but as we ramp up now, the presidential season will be upon us of who announces, who jumps in, and will Joe Biden be seeking re-election? We'll all know soon. And we'll be talking about those this week. Thank you all so much, and we'll be back tomorrow for another edition of Pod and Roku TV's World Edition. Thank you.
Look forward to it.